Thank you all for coming. I'm thrilled to be in this exhibit and paired with the origami artists. And so this is an opportunity for me to not really, I will explain my technique, but it's mostly my journey to get to this place. Of course, everything we do leads up to it. And working this way has really been a fusion of everything I've been interested in my life and my experiences. So I'm happy to share it with you. So I am a paper cutter, but I say that I am a painter who now cuts my work out of paper. And I really feel like when I'm doing it, I am painting with paper. So I've laid down my brush and I've taken out my X-Acto knife. So this is just an example of how I used to paint, and I included this one because the map is cut in and supposed to be the illusion of folding it into origami birds, which I thought related to the next door exhibit. So I painted, and also I cut stencils with an X-Acto knife to airbrush in part of the artwork. So the background was always kind of airbrushed with watercolor on top of different things I painted. And then I decided to, instead of just carefully cutting through the stencil material to use, that I would, oh, here's another example. Okay, I'm already jumping too quick ahead. Okay, I'm from Los Angeles. My first career was working in the animation industry. So I still feel like my work reflects things that I included in that professional work. Movement, multiple things, metamorphosis. So here's another example of the kind of watercolor that I was doing. Again, the background being like airbrushed using stencils. And also trying to make my work increasingly more personal. I often included koi in my work because one is that it's a symbol of resilience and good luck and strength. You know, there's the myth that koi swim up waterfalls. You know, that's why they exhibit their strength. But also, we have a koi pond. And so I used my own koi as models. And so I've kept things, and I'll refer back to that, that often I just look at my own personal life for my source. But then I decided to actually, instead of carefully cutting the stencils, I would cut through the paper. So this is one of the first pieces I did that translated from watercolor to paper. The paper is all, the color in them is all just papers that I find. And then they're like layered. But when I started doing this, I've now delved more into the heritage of paper cutting. And I also love to travel. So, you know, it's just an epiphany for me to realize there is paper cutting in so many cultures around the world. Right now, we're about to embark on celebrations for Day of the Dead, so papel picado. In China and Japan, they use it for like zodiacs, you know, the calendars, but primarily the traditional paper cuts are one layer. So like in China, they use red paper. In Poland, they do layer their paper, but it's like cut out of one background, like this one being black, and then they paint on little pieces that they glue on to get the color. So it's a little bit different. Also, other examples of traditional paper cuttings is the heritage that came from Switzerland and Germany. I never can pronounce these words, even phonetically, very well, but Scherenschnitzer, which is cut with little scissors, and even the tradition of silhouettes in France. And I just learned in this research that the word silhouette was named after this finance minister because of the economic demands upon the French people It's associated with things made cheaply. And I love that also about paper cutting and why it is in so many cultures, because it's a craft that can be done with just simple materials, simple tools. I often thought of it being a craft that is done by women on their dining room tables and then moved off for the evening meal. But actually, it wasn't always done by women either, I learned. Okay, and then from the immigrants who came from Europe and primarily settling in the Pennsylvania area, we developed the tradition of paper cutting that evolved in this country. And so they mostly were depicting rural scenes, farm life, and also used for things like Valentine's. And, so even now, children, the tradition of cutting like snowflakes. So it is so embedded in so many people's lives, this tradition of paper cutting. And then what really sealed it for me that I should continue cutting my work out of paper is in my own Eastern European background. And I included these examples of Judaic paper cutting. And there are not that many historical paper cuttings because they were never intended as fine art to be saved anywhere. They were mostly used for decorating for holidays and family events, and so they were just tossed away or destroyed. But I thought what was interesting when I think about trying to have my work still reflect some of the things that I observe in traditional paper cuttings, to me, there are a couple things that stood out from these. One is that a lot of the paper cuts are symmetrical. So I have really enjoyed in my work making my work symmetrical, meaning that I make just half a drawing and I cut my work out of a doubled over piece of paper. And then I am driven to finish a certain stage of these compositions because when I open it up, that's the first time I know what the overall composition will be. So that's kind of like, you have to delight yourself in your own work, and there's so many stages that I just find so fun to keep pushing ahead to the next step. And the other thing about these paper cuts is that there's like a hierarchy of animals. So when I look at them, they're very strong horizontal and vertical lines that keep the paper together as a piece of lace. The more you cut away, the more lace-like the paper gets. But there are all these animals. So I really had the idea for the first time of having my art reflect the hierarchy in nature. Who's the predator, who's the prey. Even when I look in my backyard at my early pieces that reflected what was in my backyard, I could look at that we had koi, that we had insects, that we had birds, and kind of stack them up in some horizontal bands. And then I love that nature is often a big part of these paper cuts. And in Lithuania, they're very famous for paper cuts that are just based around the theme of trees, and trees in so many beautiful ways. So I feel like I have to call out like the people who I'm basing my work on, standing on the shoulders of different craftspeople before. And also just the manufacture of paper and the development of paper cutting. The history of paper comes from China. Even before then, people were cutting things out of things like this top one is being cut out of a leaf. So, but when paper was invented in China, then people started cutting the work out of paper. And in China now, they've been designated as a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage place for coming up with paper cutting. But paper then was brought to Japan, and they have been designated as a cultural intangible heritage for having invented washi paper. And, one of the things I refer back to in terms of animation is how labor intense it is, and also still maintaining doing a craft that's done by hand. paper making is very labor intensive. And there used to be thousands of families in Japan who made it from the crop, the mulberry that grew, that they would harvest, that would like regrow, but they would have to, harvest it, strip the bark, beat it into pulp, dry it, make it into sheets. So an incredible process. And there's still many fewer families in Japan, but also handmade paper is still made in India, in Thailand, in Bhutan, some from different plants that grow locally. But it's a hard market, since paper making, when they, in Europe, invented paper mills, then that's mostly how the majority of paper is made. But I tried to use handmade paper. And again, the color is from the papers I find, not from painting the paper. And then in all these different cultures, they use different tools. It still blows me away, because I have tried using some of the other tools, and I can only do what I do, which is using an X-Acto knife. I have tried using small scissors. I have tried using some of the different shape scissors they do use in China. I have not tried using sheep shears, which is a tradition. Really, people I met who are paper cutters do use sheep shears. I just can't do that. And I didn't know originally that the papel picado we see is a stack of tissue paper that they use a hammer and a chisel and cut out the little pieces that way. So really, this body of work and all of my commitment to the outdoor work that I do, the nature-inspired work, really began when we started doing some bigger bucket list trips. And so this piece is here, a piece from having gone to Antarctica, where I also had the idea that I take a lot of snapshots of things when I'm traveling, but I don't focus on being a good photographer. I'm not a good photographer. But I just collect images that I can refer to later, and I'm not reproducing one scene that I see. I'm really trying to capture the whole gestalt of a place, the whole overall experience. So, for instance, in Antarctica, we went through the Drake Passage, and I tried to get some of the movement in there of crossing the currents, which were strong. And then again, the hierarchy of species, from the animals in the sky, the animals in the water, the animals on the ground. And then I'm really just lucky enough in my search, and I have several places that locally I try to source my paper from. If I find a paper that is most appropriate for that place, for instance, how to capture the glistening snow that we walked on. So this kind of began the journey. And going to Joshua Tree, some of the local things. And I just want to point out in something like this, that when I did a piece like this, I did half the drawing. It was folded and then opened up. So some of the things that happened down the middle, I either cut away or emphasize, and sometimes I'm just like delighted with the shapes inside, the center kind of row in here are shapes that I didn't really expect. And then sometimes I, just for fun or for emphasis, I try to throw something off in terms of the symmetry. So in this case, the lighting, I just try to include something. And what also delights me about exhibiting my work is that people, they don't realize that it's cut out of paper. And also they're often hunting as they get closer to the work to see that it has a lot of depth in it and texture, and that it is cut out of paper. They're also noticing that, oh, there is something that is not symmetrical in that work. So that's kind of fun for me. You can't really see it, the pieces behind the screen here, this piece from Denali. And this is also, like, I often laugh and say, okay, my work isn't necessarily going to make me like a millionaire, but the really good thing about my work is it has taken me to beautiful places. So a number of years ago, I did my first artist in residency in Denali National Park. The Park Service has maintained a relationship with having artists in the park since the late 18th century, when they first built like the train across the United States. They would hire artists, landscape artists, to go paint landscapes. They'd send them back. People would go like, oh my God, I have to go to places as beautiful as Yosemite and Zion. And people started riding the trains and visiting those places. So there's about 50 parks in the United States that still invite artists. It's like a competition, and house them for anywhere from 2 weeks to a month. And I have been very lucky, and I will show you different opportunities that I've had to be in those parks. And Denali was our first, probably the most interesting, because where they housed us was very remote. Cabin, very rustic cabin built in the 1920s. So at night, when all the people who take the shuttle, if anybody's been to Denali National Park, when the shuttle bus stops, there are very few people in the park. So we were way in the park. So how I work when I'm there, I don't necessarily make art on the spot. But again, I'm collecting images from my snapshots, but also just like as I hike, just collecting kind of like the order of things that I'd want to represent. And the first thing the ranger told us when we got to that cabin is that there would be a family of rock squirrels that lived underneath the cabin. So that's like the snapshot I took, and then here they are like at the bottom. And then I love wildflowers, so I always am trying to look at what flowers are at that location. So these kind of, I can't remember now what the name of those flowers are, the little bluebell flowers. And then I did include Denali Mountain, although you can go there and rarely see it. So we did get our glimpse, and I put that in there. But it's, again, kind of the hierarchy of the animals and all the flora and fauna. The next park that I was at was Zion. And again, trying to capture the mountain. There's one mountain when you come in that's called the Watchman. That's like at the entrance looking out of everything. But, the lizards and stuff. So it's kind of like people ask me if I say that I collage my work. I don't collage my work. I collage my ideas about the composition. So I'm like always kind of like piecing it together in my mind. Then I was in Petrified Forest, which is in Arizona. Again, it's a park that most people drive through. The road is like 26 miles. People just fly through that park and they're done with the park and they can check it off their list. But no, I was there for 2 weeks, and I was there at an explosion of wildflowers. So that's what the yucca bloom is. And every place has its own palette of colors. So I really try to make sure I capture that. It's right on the edge of what they call the painted desert, with the range of colors that are in that background. And then the only thing that really contrasted those desert colors is the lizards that had this, blue-collared lizards that had this intense turquoise on them. And this piece, Audience at Sunset, was from Lassen Volcanic Park in California. It's a park a lot of people don't get to who live in California because it's not open year-round. It snows a lot there. But you can see how that snapshot of the geese at sunset then gets like incorporated into my work. Lassen was amazing because everywhere you hike in Lassen, you still feel like the mountain is like looming over. And not in this piece, but we also happened to be there at an explosion of butterflies. That was a unique life experience. Then I was in Capitol Reef National Park, a park less visited in Utah than most. But if you go to Utah, that's the one you should go to because so many things to do there. And I was in a house that every morning there were 10 deer that would be eating breakfast outside my back porch. 10 was perfect because, again, my compositions a lot of times are symmetrical. So I made a composition that had 5 deer, opened it up, and there were the 10 deer, so it was perfect. But again, something can throw it off the symmetry. So I often put in the mountain that is not symmetrical. So the top can be, the bottom or the top, they can switch of what part is symmetrical. And then I was lucky enough to be in Porcupine Wilderness Mountain State Park. And you go like, well, why do you want to go to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan? Most people, even in Michigan, don't go to the Upper Peninsula. But every place has its unique palette, and so that's becomes the fun challenge of switching up the colors. And it was the densest old growth forest that we've ever experienced. Even the cabin that they gave us to stay in the middle of forest, in the middle of the daytime, it was dark. The light could not even filter through the canopy of leaves. So I did a number of compositions, one being in the dense forest, but then also we were on the edge of Lake Superior, which, coming from California, you think you were on like the edge of the Pacific Ocean. It was so enormous. So some of the images, like this one on the horizon, I mean, they translate more directly to the snapshot. Some I mix up more. And then just some other of my influences. And one of the very liberating things that I've done in my compositions is not worried about the European concept of one-point perspective, where things are larger in the front, smaller in the distance. When I was younger, I traveled extensively through Asia, including spending a lot of time in India, and I've always admired the Indian miniature paintings. They have a very different sense of perspective. And so I've allowed myself to do that in my work, of putting the emphasis on what is important to me, not necessarily how I perceived it in real life or the correct relationship of sizes to things. So it's really just like what's important in my experience. So, in these miniatures, there are figures that are the same size in the background as in the foreground. I often look at and am very influenced by Japanese color woodblock prints. Honestly, I wish I could do that instead of paper cutting even, because I just think it's an amazing tradition, and and it's really a dying art because there aren't people who are cutting out those meticulous blocks that they print from, and then to print them and register has its own challenges. So, but also the color, but also I'm always thinking about negative space, where they're always like balancing the positive and the negative. So mine basically, when I worked in watercolor, I would fill in the spaces with color, and sometimes I would go, oh, maybe I should have done that a different color. But no, it's already in the paper. There's no like turning back on that. I have actually a lot of negative spaces that I'm filling in with color, the paper from the back side. And so I can actually evaluate how color works and then maybe change my mind. So again, an example of positive and negative and the balance of how they interplay. So people do ask me like my influences, and also I say that luckily my journey in paper cutting has led me to discover people instead of like, looking at them first. No, I've been doing my art and then I have discovered people on the pathway. So just a shout out to this printmaker, Frances Gearhart. She was a teacher. I admire that because I also used to teach art after I stopped working in the animation industry. She spent a lot of time making color prints of the California coast, and her colors are just beautiful. So I'm always looking at really interesting color combinations. And also Margaret Armstrong, who was a very well-known book cover designer, very much in the arts and crafts, Art Nouveau tradition, and how she stylized a lot of her flowers. She also was among the first women who went down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and then wrote a guide to the flowers from the Grand Canyon. But I also tell myself that I can stylize things and think about things creating patterns. And just, again, Joseph Albers, how color is in context. So when I have a hole and I put the paper in that space, for instance, the space for the sky, often I go, oh, that color actually doesn't even work. Maybe it should be a different color than blue. It could be a yellow sky. I mean, you have to look at the contrast, the space that it's in. So looking at color in the context, I've learned a lot about color working this way, and I've ended up with color combinations I never would have just guessed at or pre-planned. But besides my nature inspired work, I also do make urban landscapes. So I've kind of, in these times we live in dense cities having more issues in them. So I've made a lot of work also about Los Angeles, about traffic. Here's really the craziness of being stuck in traffic. I run in Santa Monica on the boardwalk, and sometimes I'm just like, oh my God, it is so beautiful, but I'm just running past homeless people, ignoring them like they don't exist. So here's a picture, a tribute to them, the conflicts in Santa Monica, and that they do exist. I'm also inspired by local things. These two pieces were from going to the Huntington Gardens, really one of my favorite places to get inspiration, beautiful colors and plants that you can't even imagine, they're so fanciful. And as you see, most of my pieces are contained within a border to hold the piece together, but I do try to break out of those borders sometimes. So I've experimented in different ways. I'm showing this one panel. This is when I've showed it as two panels of the monarchs and them kind of like flying off. But then even sometimes those same themes get interpreted a different way. So again, a different way of showing the monarchs. This is more, again, that theme of metamorphosis that I go back to a lot of my work. And since we were talking about folding things from the origami next door, a lot of my pieces are symmetrical, but I did a series of mandalas where I folded it. It was 4 folds, well, 2 folds, so that I had the 4 quadrants. And again, kind of not staying within the rectangle. And I'm just going to end before questions of saying, and then I often go back again to what is closest to home, my own backyard, my koi. And, we came out of years of just spending a lot of time in our backyard, so it was good to be able to be inspired by my backyard. Okay, I will open it up. Oh, I'll just say that for the first time, I had this idea, if anybody's taken time to try to, behind the screen is a little bit of an exhibit, just to try to show some of the steps of how I go from a drawing to the finished piece. And also I will be doing a paper cut workshop next weekend? Next weekend, if anybody wants to participate in that. Does anybody have any questions for me? I tried to not tell you the how I do it, but more the what I think about in doing it.
I just want to know, many folk may already know, but so the blue part of like this painting is like the negative, and then then you put colored paper behind it, and then you have to cut that paper as well for the design. And then, but I'm just curious, I feel like, how does it stay together?
Well, so I do a drawing first on just white paper with like black Sharpie so that I can use whiteout, and I'm always like modifying the drawing and also making sure it's all going to stay together. So everything is that's the dark blue, all these outlines are like translating it into the colored paper. Then I have to fill in all those negative spaces with color, so I do that from the back. But really there's a lot of labor-intensive steps, but I don't see it that way because I just enjoy being in my flow, you know. But everything so the paper is bigger than that space. I have to cut around it to just make sure there's not, like, say, green, where I also then want blue. So there's a lot of steps of cutting away, and it's all glued together with archival glue. But I'm putting it on, and then I'm putting more color under and filling in more spaces. So in the end, you have to get close is there's a lot of depth to the paper, because every time a paper is layered, even though paper is very thin, you know, it adds some thickness to it, and it kind of adds up. I mean, paper is an amazing material because it seems like it's fragile, and yet because the way it's made with all the interlocking fibers from the vegetation that it's produced from, it's very strong. But you can imagine if there was no color here, it's a piece of lace work, the top layer.
I can move the monitor out of the way if you want to talk about.
Well, people can, no, I referred to it. You can see afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah,
But that's the best way to understand.
yeah, yeah. There are a lot of steps, but each step I feel so like pushed to see how it will keep evolving that I keep like working on it. And then I stand back and go, oh my gosh.
We're happy you do.
How long does a piece like this take in your time?
You know, I often say, well, okay, here was a new answer. Somebody suggested I say that somebody asked Picasso how long some little squiggle took that he did on a napkin, and they said, well, it just took you like a couple seconds. He said, no, it took me my whole life. So yeah, it took me my whole life to get here. But I spend about a month, I would say. I mean, different if I have like a deadline to meet because I have a show coming up.
You do it because you enjoy it.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes deadlines push me to stay up later.
Right, okay.
But there is the drawing stage that, considering what the composition takes a chunk of time,
Right.
and then the actual execution of it. But really, the best place for me to be is when I just have like a whole day and can just, you know, just really get into the rhythm of it. Yeah, hi. Yeah.
I'm wondering if working in this particular process, it's so particular and specific, determines or influences, one, the way you see the world artistically, that may be too obscure, two, certain things like content or size. Would some of it determine that this is not appropriate for this process? That might be a big painting, that it wouldn't work with this. But also just the way you come as an artist to the world. I missed the first 10 minutes because of traffic. So you may have already said that.
No, I'm not sure I'm going to remember all the pieces of your question. I do sometimes work bigger, which I like that, but I can't always do that. This may not be exactly how you asked the question, but it's funny because I cut with an X-Acto knife. There are many times that I think I like to be on the blade of a knife in two ways. One is if I ever ask myself, should I include that or cut it away? Anytime I ask myself a question about the work, I do it. Like I just cut it away or take that step instead of hesitating. And I like to be on the blade between craft and fine art. And I'm in many conversations now because that line is getting so blurred that, you know, fiber art is definitely getting its day now to be shown more, ceramics is. And so I think the same should be of people who work like in paper. So cutting my work out of paper has opened doors for me because I ride both those craft and fine art. A lot of opportunities, so that's part of why I keep doing it. And then the part that I just find it like delightful. How it influences me in my real life, like when I hike now, because I'm an avid hiker, I'm always thinking about the order of things. Like, oh, I have to put those birds, those this, those that, you know. I just finished a residency a couple months ago, I guess, in Acadia in Maine, Acadia National Park, and I'm already like, I haven't gotten to it. It's like, oh, I got to put the seaweed, I have to put those cormorants, totally different colors and species than from the other parks. So I'm always like ordering things.
Order, do you mean in terms of what goes behind it or in front, or I don't know what you mean.
Well, I said that I don't really necessarily order things by like the depth, but the importance to me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are you open to working in other mediums, or like, is that something you've considered or thought about or wanted to do even? Like your work to me is very reminiscent of, for instance, like a Tiffany stained glass window. Is that something you want to do if you could pursue it?
Actually, the things that I like in my next life is I'd like to make my own paper. That's challenging. I'd like to be a printmaker because that's more the being connected to the Japanese wood block prints. And also I can actually draw. Some people look at this and they don't, oh yeah, I can draw. I'd like it to exhibit my drawing skills sometimes. I don't know if these do, but yeah, I used to draw and paint, so.
And yeah, I was going to say, you did talk about your other practices, watercolor and animation, and my question was how animation fits into this, because we've had visitors ask if you come from that background because they recognize kind of cells and.
Oh, interesting. The layering.
But that might not be the case.
No, I mean, I always say, I think I said this at the beginning, that to me it always feels like it has my sensibility. I actually at UCLA majored in biology and art. So I thought I wanted to be like a medical illustrator because that was a field I thought could marry the two. But then at the end I got very involved in the animation department, so just worked in the animation industry. So I think it really reflects movement and metamorphosis and working by hand in a labor-intensive way. And also, wow, this dates me. I worked on animated television commercials, and I met a lot of commercial illustrators and picked up a lot of art techniques from them, including that's how I learned to airbrush and cut stencils. Those commercial illustrators were kind of like designing the style of the commercials, but they also, in their professional lives, were making album covers. That's a lost art. The album covers were so incredible at that time. So I worked with a lot of those incredible illustrators and learned from them.
So I'm just curious, you generate lots and lots of paper scraps. Do you do anything with them?
You know what, I have just recently been giving more thought to that I should. But now I also, when I first started doing this, I threw the scraps away. Now I save every scrap. I have, my palette is a stack of whole sheets, then like half sheets. You know, I kind of, every once in a while I order them in like warm colors and cool colors, and then bigger scraps and then tiny scraps. Because a lot of the papers I can't find again. And especially since COVID, it's gotten a lot harder. And so I just save everything because these papers, some of them are print. So my papers are from, the more solid ones is a line of paper from Nepal. And then some come from Thailand, from Japan. And I can get some of them at Blix, but some of them at Hiromi Paper. That, if anybody doesn't know, they sell Japanese paper. And then some, it still exists at McManus and Morgan. that is a art store that's by MacArthur Park that's been there since, Chenard Art School used to be down there. And they still import papers, but it's getting harder. So some of the papers are actually printed and people use them on the screened print side. I use them on the other side. Also different dye lots. It's like some, they come lighter, darker. So I'm always looking for the different values too. So that's the challenge. That's why I save everything.
Collage all the scraps into one surface and then go at it again.
You can make paper out of the scraps.
I know, I could just make one muddy color by like blending it all together. That's a good question though.
Are you aware of the influence of Friedrich Froebel in kindergarten and paper cutting?
Who is that?
The inventor of kindergarten, Friedrich Froebel, 1926. There's 20 gifts and lessons, and paper cutting is one of the gifts and lessons, and he spread it throughout the world.
Oh, no.
Everybody's been to kindergarten. Well, maybe. Kindergarten didn't mean little kids, it meant garden of children. And that you should, I'm not going to go there, because I gave a lecture.
Another lecture.
Well, yeah, I gave a lecture here for now.
Oh,
and
really?
You can see it.
Okay.
It's on
On their
YouTube.
website?
But that's where it was spread to Germany and to England, to Russia, to Japan, and to the United States. The United States, it came in the 1854. But it's, when I saw that thing, paper cutting, oh my God.
Okay, I'll have to follow up on that.
Yeah, I can, if you want, I can send you links.
Yeah.
There's actually
Okay.
a society called Fragile U.s.a, and anybody can look it up. Froebel, USA, and they're keeping the whole philosophy going.
Wow,
But, okay.
thank you.
Just information.
Sorry, somebody else have a question?
Gary, hi.
I was just wondering, so was there a point at which you decided to sort of dedicate yourself to this style of work that you're doing? Because there must have been a point at which you were sort of doing a few of these here and there, and then it kind of must have evolved out of something simpler. Because now it's like gone so far.
Yeah.
I feel like you're really pushing the medium, and it's really interesting. So.
No, thank you. I like feeling like I am pushing this medium in another way. I always say I do it in a very painterly way. Yeah, the two things was doing the watercolor. I actually started boring myself because I would just kind of like be filling it in like a coloring book. So it was kind of putting me to sleep. So when I did this, and I've probably been doing this now as long as I was doing my body of watercolors, I just find myself finding like delight and joy in every step of the way. So that cemented it, opportunities to show in different ways, and then just figuring out how to make it evolve further. Yep, I'm not going back. And having now a big supply of X-Acto knives.
I'm wondering how often she has to change the blade.
Do the pieces have a lot of longevity? Like are they fragile overall, or?
No, actually the more, like I said, paper is very not fragile because of the interlocking fibers. So each paper isn't, but they end up being a lot of thickness of paper. So these ones are all being exhibited in frames, but sometimes I exhibit them just from hanging clips. And then you can really feel like they are more like a textile. I mean, that has like weight to them. And I like actually been exhibiting that way because you get the more tactile feeling to them. And they're, as far as anything can be, they are like a color fast, I mean, but anything you hang that's art, if you hang it in the sun, is going to fade, whatever. But, yeah, the dyes and stuff should be color fast and the paper lasts. I guess unless you have silverfish or something like that, right? Any more questions? Good.
So what's next for you?
What's next?
What's next for you?
Doing the work about Acadia National Park. Yeah. The exchange for being an artist in residence in the parks is when I'm there, I have to do some kind of public engagement, which can be a workshop or a lecture. And then they give you a certain amount of time to make a piece of art about the park, which you donate to the park. And then some of the parks have physical locations within the park, like art galleries, or in their visitor center, they hang the art. I don't know what happens to all of it, but yeah, so I have that deadline, plus it usually generates a number of other pieces besides what I donate. Yeah.
What about your trip to Galapagos? That must have given you some new material.
Yeah, I just came back from the Galapagos. We did a family trip, and wow, my only fantasy is that, my husband is here, he'll hear me say this, that I would make 2 pieces that I could give to each daughter that we took on the trip. They have their memories, though. They don't need my art.
Might feel different.
But it would make a good piece, because it is a great place to visit.
And question about the palette, because that is such a different direction, and we have this pretty muted group here, which is not exclusively what you do, but what is that the starting point? The paper, the frame, the lace, as far as your color, or when do you have to start with that?
Well, I start with the one color that's going to be the outside, but as long as you're asking, I didn't reveal this in this exhibit. Sometimes I actually cut out 2 of the same composition. And when I do that, I do 2 very different colors. Because after that point, like I don't plan the color at all. So that's why I also feel like I'm painting. The only thing that's planned is pretty specific composition, but even that changes as I do it. I cut things away and I add other things. They're so busy now that you wouldn't know if I added some more animals or flowers or something. It would just like blend in. So it starts out a pretty specific drawing, but then I let it evolve. The color completely is like painting. So when I have a composition that I start out with 2 different like color drawings, then the color just evolves completely different ways, that's part of the delight for myself, you know.
But you
Yeah.
don't make like 2 editions. You just carry out one completely.
No, I finish both of them,
You do.
but they end up looking related but not the same because they're different. Yeah.
So are you folding them then, and cutting both sides at one time and not folding it?
Yeah. I mean, not all of them that way, but a lot of them are that way. Or like, like the one from Lassen there, part of it is symmetrical, but part of it isn't. Yeah. It's to keep you guessing and looking.
I think it's really cool.
Oh, go ahead.
It's really cool to hear that you have an animation background, and I think one thing that really stands out to me in like all the work is the animals. Like I feel like I can really see the movement in all of them, and like the way their bodies are moving. So I'm just like curious, like how I guess the animation in the background informing that. Like, do you feel like you can see like the scenes moving when you're
Well, I think about they're moving, but really the poses of the animals are from my snapshots. Wow, when I worked in animation, I actually had to make the animal like move. It's much easier just to look at a photograph. Yeah. And please, those who came later, look at the work up closer.
Absolutely. Yes.
Good, thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.